坐的那个前台都是我们预定的，所以你也坐在他旁边。
但是他上来的时候，我坐哪里呢？
待会儿我要问问他们那个。
Check 1 2, check 1 2, check check.
The hearing will come to order, and good morning to everyone. When China bullies, incarcerates, tortures, and even executes a prisoner of conscience, their entire family and friends suffer an excruciating sense of loss, bewilderment, emotional pain, and agony. Often members of the family are themselves subjected to interrogation, mistreatment, and house arrest in order to amplify the hurt. In a very real sense, everyone close to a prisoner of conscience goes to jail and lives a seemingly unending nightmare. Every day, family and friends are left to wonder what terrible abuses awaits dad or mom, or a brother or a sister, or a child. Every day, the tears flow. The people who rule China today with an iron fist resort to these ugly methods of control in the mistaken assumption that the people, the masses, can't be trusted to govern themselves, practice their faith as they see fit, or create a family. China's barbaric one-child-per-couple policy, for example, in effect since 1979, continues, despite some of the hyperbole about reform, continues unabated to make brothers and sisters illegal and relies on ruinous fines and penalties, forced abortion, and coercive sterilization, crimes against humanity, to achieve its ends. And all the news, content, and commentary in cyberspace, on TV or radio, or in print media in China today continues to be strictly controlled and manipulated by the Communist Party. The Chinese government today is in the business of breaking minds, bodies, and hearts. The repression is systematic, pervasive, unrelenting, and unnecessary. That's because the people of China love their nation, and they do deserve better treatment. Even heroic persons like Chen Quanzhen, who is with us today, and his dear wife, who is equally brave, Wei Jingshang, Rabia Kadir, Bishop Xu of Baoding Province, Harry Wu, and countless others who have demonstrated by their extraordinary perseverance and indomitable will to advance bedrock human rights principles, regardless of cost, carry the indelible scars of unspeakable mistreatment. The people who rule China today employ these ugly methods of control to prop up their own political power and increase their own personal wealth. China, a great nation, deserves better. Far too many of us who live in freedom often fail to exert ourselves in a meaningful way to assist prisoners of conscience and their loved ones in China and, frankly, elsewhere. Far too many of us fail to empathize with their plight or to see what's just below the facade of the purported harmonious society. How can it be that the 2010 Nobel Peace Prize winner Liu Xiaobo remains in prison while his wife Liu Xia is forced to endure this extreme isolation of house arrest and is now reportedly experiencing severe depression? Perhaps we are uninformed or too busy or prefer to look askance. However, with so much preventable suffering being endured by so many prisoners of conscience and their families in China today, the time has surely come for a more serious and sustained defense of these heroic individuals and their noble causes. All of us, including the Chinese government, have a duty to protect. Today we will hear the cries for release and freedom from 5 remarkable daughters on behalf of their wrongly imprisoned fathers, and from a dad on behalf of his unjustly jailed son. This is an appeal directly to Beijing. This is an appeal from 5 young women on behalf of their fathers who they miss so deeply. We hope that Beijing will be listening. We will also hear expert testimony from a previously incarcerated Christian pastor who cares deeply for the vulnerable and at risk, and another human rights activist who was detained in China after an attempt to visit a dissident. And I will provide the introductions as we go to our panels. I would like to now yield to my good friend and colleague, Mr. Pittenger, for any comments that he might have.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, for inviting me and allowing me to make an opening statement. I thank you for the over 30 years that I've known you, that you have been faithful to the commitment of those who are persecuted for their religious faith, for their freedoms of conscience, and for your commitment to bring liberty to these individuals. I want to thank you for the leadership that you're bringing to this discussion, which is so important today for all Americans to know and to hear, and as well as for Beijing to hear this important message. I'd like to thank these brave witnesses, those whom I met earlier today, for appearing before us, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. The issues of human rights, religious liberties, and the rule of law in China have been of great importance to me my entire adult life. These are issues I have been dedicated to since I graduated from college and with my 10 years of service with Campus Crusade for Christ, serving as the president of that organization, Dr. Bill Bright. We spent much time overseas and aware very much of the plight of the believers in China and various parts of the world. The United States must remain committed to monitoring the continued violation of the rule of law by the Chinese and stand with those committed to ending the persecution of Chinese citizens for practicing their religious beliefs, their freedoms of conscience, and striving for democracy. As a member of Congress, I take an active role on these issues as a commissioner on the Speaker's Congressional Executive Commission on China. America must be the unwavering light for religious freedom and for freedoms of conscience and political freedom throughout the world. And our stance on issues relating to these freedoms must be resounding. As we bring light into China's appalling record of human rights violations and persecutions of believers of all faiths, we must call on them to release their political and freedoms of conscience prisoners. China signed the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in 1998, but 15 years later they have still not ratified the covenant. The time is now for China to take real, meaningful steps toward reform. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the privilege of being here, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pittenger, and for your leadership on religious freedom issues and issues related to human rights in China especially. I'd like to now welcome our very distinguished panel of 5 daughters to the witness table, and I'll introduce them, and if they could come and then make their presentations. We'll begin first with Lisa Peng, daughter of Peng Ming. Lisa's father, Peng Ming, founder of China Development Federation, was framed by the Chinese Communists in 1999 and imprisoned for 1.5 years. When he was released from the labor camp, Mr. Peng fled to Thailand and arrived in the United States in 2001. There he founded China Federal Development Committee. In 2004, Peng was trapped by Chinese special agents and kidnapped to China. In 2005, he was sentenced to life in prison on the false charge of organizing and leading a terrorist organization. Peng's 17-year-old daughter, our witness Lisa, was born in Beijing and suffered doubly as a second child by being denied official legal recognition. Her family fled political persecution in 2000 and was accepted by the United States as a UN refugee in 2001. Lisa is currently a senior at Laurel School in Cleveland, Ohio. She is the principal keyboardist of the Cleveland Orchestra Youth Orchestra and was featured high school Lincoln Douglas debater at the City Club in Cleveland, Ohio. Lisa, thank you and welcome. We'll then hear from Grace Geng, who is the 20-year-old daughter of imprisoned Chinese human rights lawyer Gao Zhejiang, the award-winning human rights lawyer who was convicted of inciting subversion of state power and sentenced to a 3-year prison term. After being arrested and released several times from 2006 to 2010, Gao Zhejiang was accused of violating the terms of his parole and sent back to jail to serve his 3-year term. Many times during this period, Gao disappeared. He is currently incarcerated in a prison in the far western Xinjiang. During years of her father's disappearance and torture under Chinese government persecution, Grace, along with her mom, Geng He, also experienced tremendous harassment, intimidation, and beatings. She was deprived of her education opportunity as well, unable to live a normal life anywhere. Grace and her mom and her little brother, Peter Gao, fled to the United States before Gao's 2009 rearrest and redisappearance. Grace now lives in California and is a sophomore in De Anza College in California. Welcome, Grace. We will then hear from Tiana Wang, daughter of Wang Bingzheng. She was born in 1989 and was named to commemorate the victims of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Soon after her 13th birthday, her father, Wang Bingzheng, a Western veteran democracy activist, disappeared. After 6 months of secret custody, the Chinese government announced Wang Bingzheng's arrest. He was subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment on false charges of espionage and terrorism. Tiana has spent much of her time and energy working for her father's freedom. This journey has taken her around the world in a process of discovery of the ideals of her name and bodies, and her efforts have been fictionalized into a young adult fiction titled 9 Days by Fred Hyatt, a book that I encourage people to read. It's a wonderful book. I originally got it from the Library of Congress when it was published, and I thank him for bringing light to many of the issues here, but especially to Tiana. Tiana graduated McGill in East Asian Studies and recently spent a year studying Mandarin in Taipei. Currently, she is advocating full-time for her father's release. We will then hear from Bridget Chen. Many of us know that Bridget's dad, Liu Xianbin, used the pen name Xiamen, Wang Xiamen. He was one of the original signers of Charter 08 and participated in the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests. Liu was first arrested in 1991 and held in Beijing's infamous Qingcheng prison. Liu served 2.5 years for so-called counter-revolutionary incitement. After being released, Liu was sentenced again to a 13-year prison term for inciting subversion of state power. After his release, he was detained in June of 2010 and then sentenced to a 10-year prison term in March 2011, again for inciting subversion of state power, whatever that is. Bridget's father has been in prison for almost all of her life. In 2011, after the Chinese government refused to give Bridget's mother a passport, Bridget fled China and arrived alone in the United States. Now just 16, Bridget will speak up for her dad and for her family as a witness. Next, we'll hear from Wang Zhiwen, Danielle Wang, on behalf of Wang Zhiwen, a PRC Ministry of Railways engineer who became a Falun Gong practitioner in 1992. On July 20th, 1999, Wang was seized from his bed by police and taken away. This was the same day the Chinese Communist Party began its crackdown on the Falun Gong. On December 26, 1999, Wang was sentenced to 16 years in prison. The sentencing trial, in which Wang was one of the 4 defendants, was nationally broadcasted, and it was clear to viewers that defendants had been physically abused. The 4 were convicted of organizing and using a heretical organization to cause death, another big lie, and illegally obtaining state secrets. Wang Zhiwen's daughter, Danielle, is a U.S. citizen. Since her father's arrest, she has been working tirelessly to call for his release through public events, hunger strikes, sit-ins at Chinese consulates, and speaking out at various events around the world. Danielle has not been able to get back to China since she arrived in the U.S. in 1998, and she hasn't been able to speak with her father since July of 1999. It is her hope that one day soon she can be reunited with her mom and dad as they rebuild their lives together. Thank you, ladies, for your bravery, your courage, your extraordinary love, which has been for so many years. And frankly, we are all moved by your loss, which, God willing, will be turned into a release. And when you speak today, know that you are speaking right to the government of China, because my hope and prayer is that they will be listening. If we could begin now with Bridget.
I am Lisa Peng, daughter of political dissident Mr. Peng Ming. I would first like to thank you for reaffirming the universal values of freedom, democracy, and justice for my father and other dissidents like him. I know that my father would be very grateful for your efforts to revive his mission. My father, Mr. Peng Ming, is an environmentalist, an economist, and a human rights activist. He is the author of The Fourth Landmark, a book on China's economic and political growth that was sponsored by the Ford Foundation. He was also the founder and president of China Development Union, an organization which sponsored think tanks that gave his fellow Chinese citizens the opportunity to discuss highly censored topics like freedom, democracy, and justice. As a result of his political activism, in 1999, my father was sentenced to 18 months of re-education through labor camp. At the time, I was 2 years old. Upon his release, my father was faced with the possibility of a second arrest, and so my family fled from political persecution in China to the United States as UN refugees in 2001. But 18 months of labor camp did not stop my father from continuing to stand up for human rights. In 2004, when I was 8 years old, my father went to Thailand to establish a safe haven for persecuted refugees like himself. There, he was lured by 8 Chinese secret police to the border of Thailand and Burma, where he was kidnapped at gunpoint and brought back to China, the country that had persecuted him in 1999, the country that now sentenced him to life in prison. The United Nations Working Group for Arbitrary Detention has determined that the deprivation of my father's liberty is arbitrary and is in contravention of Articles 19 and 20 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Furthermore, my father is a U.S.-based dissident with UN refugee status who escaped political persecution in China. Therefore, his kidnapping is in violation of the principle of non-refoulement, which forbids the return of a victim of persecution to their persecutor. My father has also been arbitrarily deprived of his right to due process, as he was denied access to a lawyer and to a jury of his peers. Although my father has been denied the exercise of his right to freedom of expression, he continues to exercise, physically and mentally. Despite nearly 10 years in prison, suffering heart attacks, arthritis, malnutrition, and kidney stones with no medical care, my father still persists and remains hopeful. It is this hope that my father has instilled in me, despite the thousands of miles that have separated him from nearly a decade of my life, a decade during which I have been privileged to receive an American education and learn about freedom, democracy, and justice, but a decade during which my father has remained imprisoned for fighting to secure those very same values. As an American citizen, I cannot merely stand by and tacitly approve as these fundamental freedoms are undermined. It is Congress's unwavering dedication to upholding those values and unrelenting efforts to free prisoners of conscience that give me hope for the future, for the possibility of telling my father in person how much we have all cared about his health and his dream for China's future. I hope that my father will first and foremost be given proper medical attention and visitation rights, and ultimately, I seek his release. I join with my fellow sisters here today to request Vice President Biden to ask Chinese leaders to release our fathers and to request an Oval Office meeting with President Obama to share our stories. I know that my dream to be reunited with my father and my father's dream for his country can come true with your support, persistence, and affirmation of the universal and fundamental values of our country: freedom, democracy, and justice. Thank you very much.
Peng, thank you so very much for your testimony. We've been joined by Congressman Mark Meadows. Ms. Meadows. And then we'll go to Ms. Ging.
I would love to hear from you. I'll make one brief statement, and because your testimony right now just spoke to that, is that this is a story that needs to continue to be told. The chairman has dedicated his life to making sure that it is heard. I'm privileged and honored to be part of the support to do just that, and we will not stop until families have been reunited, and that truly that this atrocity is taken from the face of not only your country but many countries across this world. You know, there was William Wilberforce, fought for many years to end slavery, and today we look out and we see a different kind of slavery that is happening. So let's continue on in the effort of the William Wilberforces of the world, and I just applaud you for being here, and I thank the chairman for his dedication.
Ms. Meadows, thank you very much for your comments and for your leadership as well. I'd like to now go to Ms. Ging.
Dear honorable friends, I'm thankful for giving me an opportunity at this hearing so I can speak a few words for my dad, human rights lawyer Gao Zhisheng. I'm very grateful for the U.S. Parliament for caring about my father's case. I'm Authority Gao's daughter, Grace. I was born to a happy family with mom and daddy's loving care and relatives and friends around. I've been happy and never feel lonely. But at the age of 13, my life has turned upside down. On October 15, 2006, policemen kidnapped my father at my auntie's room in Shandong. Because of my father's taking up and investigating for the cases for the persecuted faith group. On the very same day, a group of policemen forcibly broke into and stationed at my house in Beijing. Since then, 6 to 7 policemen had stayed at my house each and every day. House arrest me, my mom, and my younger brother with surveillance, 24 hours a day and 7 days a week, including watching over our sleep and even going to our bedroom. In order to monitor us tightly, they didn't allow me and my 3-year-old kindergarten brother to go to school. Under my mom's dad's protest of opening the gas stove, the policeman finally agreed to our rights of education, but still under the severe surveillance of policemen. I had to ride to their police car to school every day. There were 6 or 7 policemen accompanying me to school. They always abusively insulted my father in the car. One day, on the way to school, there were two people talking among the roadside, and one policeman pointed to them and asked, "Aren't they Gao Zhisheng and Hu Jia chatting?" Another policeman followed up immediately and said that yes, they are gay friends, and they all laughed widely. That's how I start my day of school each day. Policemen went in and sit behind me in the classroom in each and every class, including music course. The severe of surveillance applied to my toileting too. They went to the restroom with me and did not let me close the door. One of the most annoying things is that my teacher in front of the whole classroom and said, "None of you can bring cell phones to school. If Grace uses your cell phone, you will face very serious political charges." Also, my computer class was the only course in school being cut off. My spirit and my nerves went close to collapse. After my father was taken away from us, I endured the pressure brought to my day-to-day life, suffered discrimination from classmates and teachers, and was forced to experience the loneliness at my young age. I lost all my sense of security. My 3-year-old brother had also sat in the police car to classes. His kindergarten classroom is the only room with surveillance cameras in the whole nursery. In September 2008, the policeman did not allow me to go to school again. This promoted our determination to leave China to escape this unbearable mistreatment. Partly for our education, at friends' help, my mother took me and my brother to flee China and came to the United States. Coming to this land of free, I did not have the trace of excitement. I miss my father so much. Combined with the accumulated worries about my father, I couldn't take it anymore and experienced a complete nervous breakdown. The first Christmas night in the United States, I was admitted into the hospital. I've been living in the United States for nearly 5 years now. I couldn't hear my father's voice, nor receive his letter or about a current situation. I miss him so much. The most recent news was the past January that my uncle went to the prison to see him. My uncle was not allowed to release any information about my father by the Beijing authority. It's almost another year since then. Enforced by various reasons and regulations, they did not allow my big family members to see my father, my grandpa, my grandma, 3 aunts, and his brothers and sisters, and all other relatives. Moreover, all my relatives' names were so-called blacklisted. They were deprived of the rights from even getting a password. 8 years passed. Prosecution about my father's is not only not over, but it's also extend to all his family members. Living in the freest country in the world, it has been very sour in my heart. The freedom has not yet been opened to me or my family. My younger brother had tearfully said to me once, "I really couldn't remember Daddy's face and figure. I am no longer familiar with his voice." Today, I summon my courage and speak up at the hearing of my story and injustice suffering. I want to let you know that my father is still behind the bars, and my mom is in poor health, struggling to support the family. I need to go to school to complete my education, and my brother is still small. How individuals or a family can constantly fight with a huge country that had made our family suffering so long. I hope the U.S. government and people can hear our hopeless voice and act right now. I know that only you can help me get back to my normal life, comfort my brother's young heart and feelings, help my father to be released with peace, and get my family renewed. Thanks.
Ms. Gang, thank you so much for your testimony. Ms. Tiana Wang.
Thank you, honorable members of Congress, for giving me the opportunity to testify today. My name is Tiana Wang, and as the world prepares to commemorate International Human Rights Day, I'd like to tell you about my father, Wang Bingzhang, a political prisoner currently serving a life sentence in China. My father, Wang Bingzhang, is a New York-based permanent U.S. resident and a prisoner of conscience currently serving the 11th year of a life sentence for his pioneering work in pro-democracy activism. He is the founder of the overseas Chinese democracy movement and dedicated his life to promoting rule of law, freedom, and human rights in China by starting the dissident magazine China Spring and several organizations opposing the communist government. In 2002, my father was kidnapped in Vietnam and forced into China, where he was taken into custody by Chinese police. After being held incommunicado for 6 months, he was subjected to a sham trial and found guilty of espionage and terrorism. My father was sentenced to life in prison and has been serving his sentence in solitary confinement ever since. In a country without meaningful rule of law, my family has no means to legally appeal my father's conviction, despite having secured exonerating evidence for the graver charges against him. The lawyers we've retained on his behalf are routinely intimidated by authorities, obstructed from visiting him, and threatened with disbarment. My father will be turning 67 in a few weeks. The past decade of confinement has taken an irreversible toll on his physical and mental health. While he languishes in prison, I've spent the past decade campaigning for his release by telling his story on public platforms and lobbying the Canadian and American governments for assistance. As a result, the Chinese government decided that I too needed to be punished. Since I began speaking in public, the Chinese government has refused to issue me a visa, and it's now been 5 years since I've been able to visit my father. I'm joined here today by 4 young women whose circumstances are disturbingly similar to my own. Each of us have had our young lives defined by our father's wrongful imprisonment. So I speak on behalf of the 5 of us when I urge the United States to intervene more assertively on our behalves. First, I unabashedly ask the leaders of the U.S. government, including President Obama, Vice President Biden, Secretary of State Kerry, and Ambassador Powers, to seize all diplomatic opportunities with China to seek the release of our fathers. I believe high-level diplomacy is our fathers' best chance for freedom, and their releases must be discussed on occasions such as Vice President Biden's recent trip to Beijing. I request the help of all members of Congress in conveying this message to the administration and in compelling them to act on our behalves. Second, I ask the Obama administration to meet with the 5 of us and listen to our first-hand experiences as witnesses of China's human rights abuse. I want our stories and efforts to be heard, acknowledged, and taken into serious consideration when the U.S. devises its foreign policy with China. And again, I ask members of Congress to help us secure such a meeting with top U.S. leadership. I'd like to end my statement by reminding everyone that it is the very values espoused by the U.S. government and the other democracies that inspired activists like our fathers. If we cannot ask this government and its leaders to advocate for their release, to whom else can we turn?
Thank you for your extraordinary testimony. Ms. Chen.
Dear honorable friends, my name is Bridget Chen. Today, I want to simply introduce the current situation of my father, Liu Xianbin, as a daughter and a witness. My father has been in prison 3 times, which totals up to 14 years because of his political views. Like every other parent, my dad has always wanted to take care of me as I grew up. He was absent from my childhood until I was 11. When he was released from prison in 2008, it was so hard for him to believe that I had already grown up. However, he was once again taken away from my life by the policeman in June 2010. Therefore, I came to the U.S., and the distance between my dad and me was lengthened. Moreover, my mom was unable to leave China since the government would not grant her passport. Because of this, my family was separated in 3 different places. My father is in an actual prison, and my mom is in an invisible prison. As a daughter, all I want is the reunion of my family and the completion of my parents' marriage. However, this simple wish became unrealistic in China, and my dad was convicted of inciting subversion of state power just because he has told the truth and done what is righteous. Life in prison must have been hard for my dad, but fortunately, we can still encourage each other by mailing. In the newest letter from my dad, he wrote, "My child, your complaint of your ugly handwriting has made me feel guilty, because if I was with you when you were little, I would have taught you a beautiful cursive. The absence of me has made this family incomplete, and it must have been difficult for both you and your mom when I'm not by your side. So I can only express my love through these letters so that you will still feel my love for you, even when I'm not here with you. Never stop being virtuous and kind-hearted, for even though kind people has always been treated unjustly in this chaotic world, they will be blessed and remembered eventually." At the end of the letter, he writes, "Your happiness and confidence in the United States has comforted me. You know what? All the parent wants is to see his children live happily, healthily, and peacefully." Like my dad mentioned in this letter, kind people will be blessed eventually. I hope and believe one day my dad and those who have suffered for human rights and justice in the world as China 18 will eventually receive the freedom they deserve, the freedom of both their bodies and souls. Therefore, I sincerely ask the U.S. government, Mr. Biden, and President Obama to concern more of the families of prisoners of conscience and to help us to free our fathers. And then ask for an Oval Office meeting with President Obama for more direct and detailed conversation in order to unite our families. And dear friends, please keep helping us to free all the prisoners of conscience and to keep truth and justice for every human being. Just like Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence, everyone deserves the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There was misery and fear in the past, but there is more hope ahead of us. Thank you.
Ms. Chen, thank you very much. Ms. Wang.
Thank you to the organizers for including my dad's story in this event. In a way, Zhiwen Wang can stand in for millions of Falun Dafa practitioners in China living under persecution by the Chinese regime. All of the victims being honored here and their families have endured many hardships that should have ever come about. Yet the fact that we are standing here today with all of you in the audience shows that there will always be people standing up for justice and the greater good in the world. The holiday season is coming up again. Here in the United States, many families are getting ready to gather for Christmas and New Year's. In China, we will be starting to look forward to Chinese New Year. But this time of year is always bittersweet for me. Because of painful absence in my family since my father's summary arrest and detention in July of 1999, he was targeted for no more than his peaceful practice of Falun Dafa, and he has been gone for over 14 years. My dad was born in 1949, the same year as the People's Republic of China. He served his country throughout his long career, including as engineer at the PRC Ministry of Railways. He began practicing Falun Gong in 1992. Over the next 5 years, he became a volunteer contact person for Falun Gong practitioners in Beijing, teaching the exercises, meditation practice, the principle of truth, compassion, and tolerance. In the early morning of July 20, 1999, according to eyewitness accounts from our neighbors, my father was seized from his bed by police and taken away in the waiting police vans. And then he suffered and being subject to physical abuse. The tortures include his teeth was all pulling out. All his collarbones were smashed. They put bamboo sticks along and pierced all his fingers. He suffered numerous beatings. No sleeps for 7 days. I have on my hand a wooden stick that I recently obtained from China. 15 years, that's the only thing I get from him. That was a polished wooden stick that he polished with his hand in jail. It's really smooth, but that's the only thing so far I ever got from him.
being away from my dad and growing up without his guidance was really hard. I hope that the decision I've made in my life will make him feel really, really proud. On my wedding day, we placed a single rose in his chair to symbolize his absence and celebrate his place in my life. I still have that rose, but it's been dried and discolored. I really hope that he can be always with me. Throughout the past decade and a half, I have been working to get my father released. Though I am the only one person with limited abilities, time, and resources, I have always felt obligated to dedicate 100% of my effort to raise awareness of my father's unlawful arrest and detention for no more than his spiritual beliefs. I would like to bring my dad home one day. So here, I want to ask the U.S. Congress, to ask the Obama administration to meet with U.S., the 5 daughters, to hear our stories and bring him home. I also want to speak with phone with my father. I want to channel two-way communication with my father. I want him to be released safely from jail and build him a life here in America. And finally, last, I want all the Falun Dafa practitioners in prison in China be released. I really hope that happens. It's really hard to go on. And I've never truly felt that happy, ever since my dad was arrested. And all the daughters here, they're so much younger than me. I just hope they don't go through what I go through for 15 years. Thank you.
Ms. Wang, thank you. And your testimonies need to be heard by the President of the United States, the Vice President, members of the Congress, House and Senate, members of the UN. I find it appalling that on November 12, 2013, China was elected to serve as a member in good standing on the UN Human Rights Council. Seems to me that your testimonies, and we will send your testimonies to every member on the UN Human Rights Council, as well as to every head of delegation at the United Nations and Ban Ki-moon as well. They need to hear the extraordinary agony that you and so many like you suffer as a result of having your dads and other family members in other cases ripped away from them. And I can assure you we will do serious follow-up to make sure that the 5 daughters in your testimonies are heard by a greater number of people. I respectfully ask that the press amplify, not just for today, but in a serious and sustained way, the plight of your dads and other people, because you're not exceptions, you're the pattern. You're the norm in China today. And I can assure you that our Human Rights Committee will continue doggedly to try to reach the hearts and minds of our own government officials so that this is not a talking point on page 5, if it's that at all, and that Xi Jinping and others in the leadership take seriously the damage they are doing to the people over which they rule. I do believe your fathers would be extraordinarily proud of you being here and for your tenacious defense of them for so many years. I mean, what love, what compassion, what empathy. 5 brilliant, compassionate young women from China. You do your countrymen and women a great service. I mean, Americans should see this is the pride of China sitting here, and how I'm in awe, frankly, of each of you, and I thank you for your testimonies. As a source of perhaps some hope, immediately behind you sits Chen Quanzhen and Wei Jing, his wife, who suffered 5 years of imprisonment, house arrest, and as you all know, he made a Herculean journey to the U.S. Embassy, and thankfully, the grace of God, he now is a free man, but his nephew is not. And we will hear from the father of his nephew in our next panel. But there is hope, and I can assure you that if we do more and make this the priority, not a distant page 5 asterisk priority, which it is now in far too many policymakers' minds, it will effectuate or help effectuate the release of the innocent fathers who are suffering so bravely and so horribly in Chinese Laogai in prisons and detention centers. Just a very brief question. If all of you could speak directly to Xi Jinping, maybe in a minute or so, and to President Obama. I did notice that I think at least 2 of you, maybe more, suggested a White House meeting. I think that would be a tremendous idea. I mean, the President needs to look you in the eyes and hear what you've got to say. Because when we meet, and I do this as well, when you meet with high government officials, with all the trappings of office, what really happens on the ground, especially with a ubiquitous secret police that is in the employ of the government of China, a whole different story is told as to what really occurs day in and day out, especially in the prison camps and the Laogai throughout China. So what would you say to Xi Jinping? What would you say to President Obama? What would you say to Ban Ki-moon? Because certainly those 3 individuals and others could have a huge effect on the plights of your fathers. Ms. Ping.
Many people have asked me, why have I, as a 17-year-old, sort of given up a part of my life, my childhood, to go to Taiwan, to go to D.C., and to testify on behalf of my father? And what do I hope to accomplish? And the answer to that question is, I was a second child in China, so I wasn't granted official recognition. I had no right to an education. And so when we fled political persecution, mostly on because of my father's political activism, and the fact that I was accepted by the United States and granted citizenship years ago, I feel immensely grateful to have been able to receive such a great American education and to learn about these issues of human rights, democracy, justice, and freedom. And therefore, I feel that it is my moral obligation, not just to my father, not just to the China 18, not just to the thousands of prisoners in China, but to these fundamental values that every single human being on this planet deserve. And so, therefore, I think by not speaking out, by not doing anything, by merely watching and looking as these atrocities continue to occur, that I'll be sending the wrong message to China, to President Xi Jinping. The message that I don't want to send is that it's okay, is that I will merely watch by, and that's a form of tacit consent. And so it's my belief that any little step I can do, any time I have the opportunity to share my story, to share my story of American dream, which was inspired, I'm inspired by President Obama's American dream as well. I really hope that he will continue to press for the release of my father and the fathers of the young ladies with us today, and to make human rights the forefront of our agenda, which I believe is the fundamental foundation on which other conversations of economics can develop.
And that is a hope, making it a forefront of our agenda that has not been achieved.
Right.
Exactly. Ms. Ging.
Yes, I want to say to Xi Jinping that please release our fathers so they can come back with us. And and I hope that the governors in China can visit my father, since the Chinese government doesn't allow my family and my doesn't allow my family to see my father. And please give us more information about my father's situations and his conditions of health, and that's all. Thank you.
Ms. Tiana Wang.
To President Xi Jinping, I'd like to ask him to please release our father so that our families can be united, that we can finally end this nightmarish chapter of our lives. To President Obama, I'd like him to know that his personal intervention is our father's best chance for freedom, and that I'd like him to prioritize human rights in high-level diplomacy. And to Mr. Ban Ki-moon, I'd like him to defend the universal values of human rights by advocating for our father's release publicly. Thank you.
I would like to say to President Xi Jinping that please release our fathers and all those persons conscious in order to fix the country, to make this country better and stronger. And I would like to receive the basic rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And I want my family's reunion and my parents' marriage completion. And also I want to say to President Obama, who is the dad of 2 daughters, that please understand our situation and please let our voice be heard, and please help us to make this country and this world better. Thank you.
Ms. Wang.
I want to talk to Xi Jinping. I want to explain to them that the 3 principles of Falun Gong is never wrong, which is compassion, truthfulness, and endurance. And I want my father to be released because I know he's a father too. And his daughter actually studied in U.S. Not long ago. I think he understood a daughter really crying for her dad's safety is nothing more than just a girl want her family. And I want to talk to President Obama because he is a leader of this very strong country. And I hope he can stand up for the basic human rights and get our dads safely home.
Thank you. I noticed, Grace, in your testimony, you mentioned how that when your father was home after the forced disappearance, he would try to show a lifted spirit and entertain me and my brother with humors. That certainly underscores that even though he had suffered so much, his love and devotion to you and your brother was so strong, but he tried to divorce himself. He obviously didn't just unload and tell you all the terrible things he had suffered. That has to make it even more painful, knowing that he was putting you first, and now, of course, he's disappeared again. And that's, I'm sure, has been the situation with all of you, because you are such devoted daughters, so full of love and devotion. But I thought that is a very important aspect of your testimony. Also, I noticed, Ms. Peng, Lisa Peng, you said you suffered doubly because you were a second-order birth. Most Americans are woefully uninformed, and I would say most people in the world, how draconian the one-child per couple policy is, and that when a woman is able to, through hiding their pregnancy or perhaps even sometimes a payoff to family planning cadres, have a second child, that second child is grossly discriminated against. If you would briefly speak to that.
I think some other people have mentioned, especially Grace, about the isolation that she suffered in China. Because I was a survivor of the one-child forced abortion policy, I, of course, was considered a non-entity, couldn't go to school. And even when my mom would drive my brother to school and I was in the car, the government would have 4 secret police tailgate us and bump into us as we were driving to school. And our house was, of course, tapped. Not in particular for me, because of me, but mostly because of my father's activism. So there was no future for me in China. And so the fact that I safely escaped and was accepted by the United States and am respected in classrooms, and my voice is heard in classrooms, and I have opportunities, unimaginable opportunities to do whatever I want in the future and to give back to the community that's given me so much. That's really what makes me feel so grateful and hopeful every day.
I'd like to yield to Mr. Pincher and then Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank each of you. I'm a father of 3 daughters. I love my daughters. Your fathers love you. One of my daughters' name is Grace. I want you to know how special you are to your dads. You have taken up his cause. You've taken up the cause of liberty, of freedom, of democracy, something that you will never be able to break from. You know the pain and the difficulty it is that your dad is going through, and yet you're living for him, you're living for those like him in your country and throughout the world. So I really want to commend you for your life, that you're living a very profound, just life. And your fathers are very deeply proud of you, as I am proud of my daughters. Not necessarily because of what they do. Fathers love their daughters no matter what. And your father's abiding love is always there. And I hope that you will sense and you will know that. And I pray that at some day you will be united with him. I want you to know that your work will not be in vain. As you live your lives, and you should live your lives, your Father wants you to live your lives, but you will also be carrying this banner. But it will not be in vain. You play a very important role. And as you continue to live and to speak and to be a part of coming here to Congress and going into other places, you will have a major impact upon the whole world. So you are part of a very great cause. You've been chosen for a very important time. This is an important day, an important era that America needs to recognize that human rights, religious liberties, freedoms of conscience are superior. They are preeminent. They're far greater than any economic destiny or hopes that we would have. They supersede all. So I am grateful for your lives. I'm grateful for your testimony. And having said all that, I would just like to ask, we as members of Congress, we are busy people. There are many issues in this country. This will always have a deep impression for us. But if you want to give us a reminder, if you want to give something to the American people, if you want to leave one word to the American people, if you want us to convey one thing, what's that one thing? What do you go to bed every night knowing that you're alone, knowing that your dad can't hug and kiss you goodnight, knowing that thousands and millions of others can as well? What do you want us, what can we carry back to our members of Congress, to our colleagues, that would do the most to cause us to make sure that this objective is achieved? Could you just speak a little bit to that?
Rather than asking myself, when will my father be released, I instead try to think, my father hasn't been released yet. We haven't been reunited yet. He hasn't received medical care, and he hasn't received visitation rights yet. So for me, the word yet really encapsulates my hope and my faith and my father's hope and faith and our hope and faith that one day we will be reunited. But I think hope is necessary but not sufficient, because even though I have immense hope that my father will be released, even though he has immense hope, we have to act on that hope, and we have to make that not just a dream, but a reality. And so I think the importance of today's hearing is to try to make that transition as soon as possible by calling for an Oval Office meeting, by asking, requesting Vice President Biden to raise the names of these political dissidents. I think that's, and high-level diplomacy, I think that's how we can make that effective transition from dream to reality. So that's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want all Americans to remember our fathers and stand up for our fathers. And that's all.
Thank you.
To the American people, I'd like them to know that it is the values of the United States that inspired my father to champion pro-democracy activism in the first place, and I ask that he not be forsaken in his time of need. Thank you.
Thank you.
The word I want to give to everybody in the United States is love. It's because of my father's love to China. That's why he has done all the things. He has written all those articles. It's not because he hates China. It's because he loves China. And because of his love and because of my love to him, I came here as a witness. And because my mom's love to my dad and my mom's love to me, she didn't divorce with my dad. And she chose to keep this marriage and keep this family stable. And because of all the people's love to me, they helped me to come out of China and to study here and to get all those happy lives right now. And because of everybody's love here, we can have this opportunity to be speaking here, to fight for what we trust, to fight for justice and rights. So I want everybody to think of love. Why we're doing this is because of love. Thank you.
Thank you.
The phrase I choose here is the courage to speak the truth. I think because my dad was withstanding his belief and he's trying to keep truthful to himself and his heart, he's being imprisoned. And I also believe that America was founded on the truthful to their beliefs. So I really think there's a deep connection there. And I'm here to speak what's true to my heart. So I think it's really meaningful to the Congress.
Thank you. God bless you all.
Mr. Meadows.
Thank each one of you as a father. A daughter has a special place in a father's heart, and I want each one of you to hear that and just know that even though miles and time may separate you, there is nothing that will ever separate you from your Father's love. I want to thank each one of you for your testimony and ask for your forgiveness. I was talking to my staff before I came here about the importance of making a difference in people's lives. And as I came to this particular hearing, we've been in a number of hearings, Mr. Chairman, on human rights issues in China. And for me, I thought, well, maybe it would just be just another hearing. It has profoundly touched me, your testimony. I want to thank each one of you and just say, as a father, speaking on behalf of your fathers, I'm proud of you, very proud of you. I also want to let you know that there are many negotiations and many things we do here in Congress that have lasting impact. But my commitment to each one of you is that as discussions go on with those in official positions in China, that not a single one of those conversations or negotiations will happen with my staff or me without the faces of each one of you being at the forefront of our mind. And so I want to just say thank you. Many of you have called on the President and truly on the Vice President to be your advocates. They're dads too. And so I would join with you and say that we need to make sure that this is not something that gets overlooked. You have my commitment to do that. And my friend and colleague, Mr. Pittenger, here had asked of you to each share one word. And so my one word to you would be that we will be unflinching in our dedication to help you in this area. But the one word is that you will see your dad soon. And so soon is where we will be. And I just want to thank each one of you for being here today and for giving your touching testimony. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Meadows. And for the record, Mr. Meadows is the Congressional delegate to the United Nations, and I know in his contacts and lobbying of heads of delegation, he and I and others will literally carry your testimonies and put it in the hands of these individuals from the very top, from Ban Ki-moon, right on down. Your love and devotion to your dads, your courage, the pain and agony that you carry, as well as the rest of your family, just begs the question, we have to do more, and why haven't we? So I thank you so much. This is a landmark testimony. Your testimonies is landmark. It will have an effect. And I guarantee you, all of us, and not just those that are here, others who are equally dedicated to the cause of human rights, will be unceasing, as my colleague said. And I associate my remarks with my two very distinguished friends. And I thank you, too, as a father of two daughters, one daughter-in-law who is just like our daughter. We love her just as much. You are amazing, and I thank you. I'd like to now ask for our second panel, if they can make their way to the... and thank you, ladies. Our second panel will begin with Pastor Bob Fu, who was a leader in the 1989 student democracy movement in Tiananmen Square, and later became a house church pastor and founder along with his wife. In 1996, authorities arrested and imprisoned them for their work. After their release, they escaped to the U.S. and in 2002 founded China Aid Association. China Aid monitors and reports on religious freedom in China and provides a forum for discussion among experts on religion, law, and human rights in China. Pastor Fu is frequently interviewed by media outlets around the world and has testified frequently at U.S. congressional hearings. He has also appeared before the European Parliament as well as the United Nations. Pastor Fu holds a double bachelor's degree from People's University and the Institute of Foreign Relations and has taught at the Beijing Communist Party School. In the United States, he has earned a master's degree from Westminster Theological Seminary, is now working on his Ph.D. And I just say from a very personal point of view, when we were working very hard for the release of the great Chen Guangcheng, it was Bob Fu who, on two of those occasions during hearings on Mr. Chen, actually got in touch with him in a hospital room in Beijing and put the microphone, the phone right next to this microphone here, and we heard directly from Mr. Chen, who testified in absentia halfway around the world via Bob Fu. We'll then hear from Mr. Chen Guanfu, brother of Chen Guangcheng and father of Chen Qiqui, nephew of Chinese activist Chen Guangcheng, who was arrested after defending himself and his family against local government officials who forced their way into Chen's home on the night of April 27, 2010, in Shandong Province. Mr. Chen was charged with, quote, intentionally inflicting harm. All of these people burst into his home with fists and other things raining down upon Mr. Chen. Obviously, any of us would defend ourselves, but he was unfortunately convicted in December of 2012 and sentenced to 3 years and 3 months in prison. Mr. Chen has suffered beatings and a medical emergency and was rejected for consideration for medical parole. Chen Guanfu is the elder brother, as I said, and we will hear from him momentarily. We will then hear from Dr. Devrar Marcus, a graduate of Stanford Medical School and a fellow of the American College of Physicians, and for more than 40 years has been in Washington, D.C. internist. In addition to her medical practice, Dr. Marcus has long worked to protect and serve Chinese government-targeted leaders and groups. She has traveled to Tumen, China, to provide medical services for North Korean refugees, and the government of China seeks to deport to North Korea gulags. Dr. Marcus played a central role in the case of Fang Zheng, the Chinese dissident and Tiananmen demonstration amputee, and ensured his receipt of prosthetic limbs and prosthetic training, an act that sent a message to China and elsewhere of American generosity and compassion. Dr. Marcus recently traveled to Hangzhou, China, to examine and bring public attention to the case of imprisoned dissident Zhu Yufu and to protest the denial to him of adequate medical services. Dr. Marcus is McLean, Virginia, is from McLean, Virginia, and has long been a place for refuge for pro-democracy dissidents from all over the world. And finally, we'll hear from Zhou Yufu, who is the founder of a major pro-democracy publication in China Democratic Party, who was detained and sentenced to 7 years in prison in 1999. After his release in 2006, Zhu was arrested in May of 2007. He was sentenced, again, that's the man that's you will be speaking on behalf of, thank you, Pastor Fu, if you could proceed.
Mr. Chairman and honorable members of Congress, thank you, and thank you very much for giving this opportunity for those 5 daughters whose father are still suffering in prison for 15 years, 11 years, 10 years, and on. This is the 3rd time in this year that I sit here to testify before the U.S. Congress, the international community, and all the people concerned with China's human rights condition about the rapid deterioration of human rights condition in China. Of course, nobody can really sit still and silently after hearing those cries and appeals of these daughters and fathers. We have been monitoring China's human rights condition for the past 11 years because we specifically focus on religious persecution, human rights violations, and the promotion of the rule of law in China. We got to know hundreds and thousands of sons, daughters, and family members of prisoners of conscience like Tiana Wang, Lisa Peng, Grace Gong, Bridget Chen, Daniel Wang, and of course, Mr. Chen Kegui. China's worsening human rights violations and its notorious human rights record are purely, of course, surely caused by this totalitarianism and wickedness of this Chinese Communist authorities, but also as a result of the loss of some God-given, self-evident, fundamental ideals and principles by some countries like our country, United States, in recent years. Today, the reality that the Chinese government dares to despise human rights dignity and blatantly violate universal values truly has a correlation with the appeasement policy of so-called harmony diplomacy adopted by some Western democratic societies toward totalitarianism. So I will just briefly use the 3 perspectives for my testimony today. I request the chairman to allow my written testimony into the record of Congress.
Without objection, so ordered.
On June 6 this year, China Aid Association and other 30 international human rights organizations jointly launched the Free China 18 campaign, calling on the release of 18 Chinese prisoners of conscience. They are Wang Bingzhang, Peng Ming, Gao Zhisheng, Liu Xiaobo, Guo Quan, Zhu Yufu, Liu Xianbin, 杨天水、丹东德勒、杨荣利、阿里木江、伊密提、王志文、洛桑德宗李昌、古里密若一鸣、陈克贵 and 段珠望清、郭飞行. They are only the representatives of the tens of thousands of political prisoners of conscience in mainland China. The majority of them expressed their views or protested against the tyranny with the peaceful methods, and some were imprisoned because of their religious faith. They are ethnically diverse, including Han Chinese, Tibetans, Uyghurs, and other ethnicities. And I would not be able to list all the sufferings, the tortures, the deprivation of their basic human rights because of the time limit. And the Chinese, apparently and clearly, the condition for human rights in China has continued to worsen in recent years and recent months. It has reached the worst scenario since the Tiananmen massacre on June 4th, 1989. And likewise, China is regressing in the rule of law, and there is no sign of improvement in the short term. And the Chinese Communist authorities also suppress the house churches more harshly, and religious persecution is also worsening. Mr. Chairman, I really, at this on religious persecution front, I want you to pay attention on several particular cases, such as one of the largest independent house churches called Shouwang Church. When it has been forbidden to worship indoors, it was even forbidden to enter into their own purchased buildings. They had no choice but to worship outdoors for 2 years. And believers go to different locations every week. And every week in the past 2 years, a number of believers from 10 to 120 were taken to different police stations every Sunday, and continues. And some were beaten, some even women were raped. Some pastors, the elders of the church, had been under house arrest for more than 2 years without freedom. Another case just happened recently to a government-sanctioned church group. On November 16th this year, Pastor Zhang Shaojie and 23 believers from Nanle County Three Self-Patriotic Movement Christian Church in Henan Province were all taken into police custody secretly. And the majority of them have not received any legal papers so far. So this happens to the government-sanctioned church and church leaders, just because believers of the church fight for their basic rights and social justice and offended some local government officials. Yet the leaders, these 23, are still in custody. And of course, the Chinese government has always spared no effort in its united front work through religion and overseas propaganda packed with lies. And unfortunately, some U.S.-based government, some U.S.-based NGO or religious organizations take a different standing than standing united with those persecuted. As understandable as it may be that Billy Graham Evangelistic Association needed to collaborate with the Chinese Communist government in its disaster relief efforts, but this organization at the China-USA Protestant Church Leaders Forum held in Shanghai and Beijing on November 19th and 20th this year. Sorry, I need to correct the record. It's this year, just last month. According to the news released by the Chinese government authorities, recognized the leader of the Three Self-Patriotic Committee, a puppet created by the government, the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, seems in its collaboration with the Chinese government-sanctioned church bodies, recognize solely the representatives of the Chinese government established church and said nothing about the religious persecution to their fellow brothers in the house church. In 2004, the 2004 General Assembly of the World Evangelical Alliance will be held during the October 27th, 31st, and 31st in 2004 in Seoul, South Korea. According to the Chinese government, the WEA has already sent an invitation by the senior leaders to the Chinese Christian Council and Three Self-Patriotic Movement Committee, the government organization, but it's still unknown. It will or has invited the leaders of the house churches who are the representatives, actually the majority of the Chinese church. The majority of the Protestant church leaders, as we recall in the history of the humanity, the majority of the Protestant church leaders back then, in 1940s, praised Hitler and pledged allegiance to Nazi Germany, the state government. They did not oppose principles of Darwin evolution theory introduced by the Nazi and the notions of a so-called pure breed and superior breed derived from it. We know how churches in Germany became an ally shamefully of the Nazi regime, betrayed God, and left the mark of shame in human history. Likewise, we want to know, where do we want to stand? Do we want to stand with the Nazi, the Chinese government, communist established the church as the Nazi church, as the church in Germany in 1940s? Or do we want to stand with Bonhoeffer, the confessional church who stand against the dictatorships and war warriors? So I want to just make 5 specific recommendations to Congress. I hope the Obama administration will deliver a note to the Chinese government asking for the immediate and unconditional release of these 18 prisoners of conscience. And I hope President Obama will meet with these 5 daughters and other representatives of the China 18 as soon as possible, so that he can hear directly from these daughters. Secondly, I hope human rights issue can become an indispensable component in the meeting and the strategic dialogues between Chinese-American top leaders. And thirdly, I propose to broadcast live the annual Chinese-U.S. Human Rights Dialogue on the Internet. Make the dialogue specific in goals and substantial in content. Make evaluations of China binding don't reduce this highest level human rights dialogue between the two countries to a useless show. Fourthly, I hope the House Committee on Foreign Affairs will make it mandatory that the officials of the U.S. Embassy and consulates in China, especially the visa officers, receive at least 14 days of systematic training on the background of human rights and religious freedom in China. I propose this because at present, many people who can make significant contributions to freedom and rule of law in China, and as well as the communication between China and the U.S., have been denied visas unreasonably, including some even invited by the leaders of Congress, even though they meet the criterion for entry into the U.S. Finally, and fifthly, as I just flew back from Taiwan Congress, along with Tiana Wang and Lisa Peng, after we testified before Taiwan Congress, one progress was made. That is, the Taiwan Congress, 4 members of the Taiwan Congress, along with the 14 or more members, cross-party line, they issued a letter to the leader of the Taiwan government, including President Ma Ying-jeou, to urge them to clarify whether Dr. Wang Bingzhang is a spy from Taiwan. And in the letter, it says if Dr. Wang, who was sentenced to life in prison for being accused as a Taiwan spy and terrorism, if he is a spy, the Taiwan authority has a moral and governmental obligation to fight for his freedom. And if he's not, it makes more the Taiwan government should seek clarification to the international community and to the Wang family, including their daughter Tiana Wang. So the deadline for the President Ma Ying-jeou to submit that clarification to Taiwan Congress, and actually was promised already by President Ma's representatives during the hearing, is December 10th, before the Human Rights Day. And I request...
We will come back. We're out of time for the first of a series of scheduled... Okay.
Finish one sentence, sorry. I ask Mr. Chairman to really do a follow-up, formally request the President Ma and Taiwan Congress and through the American Institute in Taiwan to do a follow-up for that request, because both Dr. Wang and Mr. Peng Ming are the permanent residents of the U.S. of refugees. Thank you very much.
We will. So thank you for that recommendation. We do have a series of votes, and I would ask, first of all, I apologize that we will have to take a very brief recess, but I do encourage, to the best of your ability, if the press could stay to hear our 2 next witnesses who have really done enormous work on behalf of human rights, and Chen Guangfu is here in the United States, but he's going back, and he has bravely come forward on behalf of his son, who is imprisoned, and I would just hope that if you could stay long enough to hear these 2 fine testimonies. We stand in very brief recess. We will resume our sitting. We do have a few members that I know are making their way over from the votes. We have been joined by Congressman Trent Franks from Arizona. Mr. Franks is the chairman of the Religious Freedom Caucus here in the House. He's also chairman of the Judiciary Constitution Subcommittee, and we welcome him to the hearing. Thank him for being here today. Our next witness will be Chen Guanfu, as previously introduced, the brother of Chen Guanzhen, and extraordinarily important, the father of Chen Qigui, who has been arrested. Mr. Chen is here and will be going back, so I want to again underscore and salute his bravery in coming forward as he is doing, a dad who cares so deeply and loves so deeply his son. And like the panel before us, where 5 daughters spoke out so eloquently on behalf of their dads, here is Mr. Chen speaking on behalf of his son. Mr. Chen.
尊敬的国会外交委员会全球人权委员会主席史密斯议员，各位外交委员会议员，各位来宾朋友们，大家好。
Honorable Congressman Mr. Smith, members of Subcommittee on Global Human Rights, the Committee of the Foreign Affairs, and ladies and gentlemen.
我是秦光诚的大哥，秦可贵的父亲秦光甫。
I am Chen Guangfu, the elder brother of Chen Guangchen, the father of Chen Kegui.
说起我们一家遭受的长期迫害，必须提到秦光诚。
Speaking of the long-term persecution of our family, the name of Chen Guangchen has to be mentioned.
因为他是对秦光诚非法迫害的继续。
Because this is a continuation of the persecution of Chen Guangchen.
现在关押秦可贵就是对秦光诚逃离的惩罚。
The current imprisonment of Chen Kegui is the punishment for Chen Guangchen's escape.
秦光诚从家里冒死逃出后，当局某些官员恼怒、恐惧到了疯狂的程度。
After Chen Guangchen risked his life to escape from his home, the officials of local authorities worked themselves into a frenzy of rage and fear.
2012年4月27号凌晨0点以后，我被宜南县公安局警察戴上黑头套，非法绑架。
It was past the midnight of April 27, 2012, when I was kidnapped with a black hood on my head by the police of Yinan County.
他们由队长薛科伟带领，翻墙、撬门、破锁入室。
Led by the Captain Xue Ke-wei, a group of police officers in plain clothes climbed over the wall and broken into my house without going through any legal procedure.
没有穿制服，没有任何法律手续。
They were in plain clothes. They did not go through any legal procedure.
我被带到宜南县京级侦察大队，戴上手铐脚镣，绑在行刑椅上，持续进行了长达47个小时的酷刑。
I was taken to the unit of the Economic Affairs Investigation, Yinan County, and put through non-stop 72-hour-long torture, during which I was tied to an interrogation chair with handcuffs and foot chains.
期间备受辱骂、打耳光、抠肋骨、踩脚趾、皮带抽、饿饭、不让喝水、不让睡觉、不让上厕所等非人道对待。
They heaped abusive language on me, stroked me hard on the face, trampled on my toes, whipped me, deprived me of food, drink, and sleep, and denied me the use of bathroom, as well as other inhumane treatment.
我被绑架20多分钟后，由双后镇镇长张健带领20多个手拿羊羔把的不法人员侵入我家，无任何法律手续，便同时对各个房间开始翻箱倒柜的搜查。
About 20 minutes after my kidnap, the head of Shuanghou Township, Zhang Jian, led 2 dozens of personnel armed with picks into my house, rummaging through every room without any legal justifications.
抢走了家中仅有的现金、手机、身份证、资料等物品一宗。
They carried off cash, cell phones, ID cards, documents, and other items.
且砸坏了家中的电视机、缝纫机、家具。
They damaged TV set, the sewing machine, and furniture.
并将多个上锁的抽屉撬坏，抢走了其中的所有物品。
They pried open several locked drawers and took away everything in them.
这期间，多人对柯桂妈进行毒打。
During the search, they beat up Chen Kegwei's mother.
柯桂也被众多闯进屋的歹徒用木棍群殴。
While Kegwei was beaten with clubs the mob was carrying, left injuries.
脸上、脖子上、胳膊上、腿上等多处被打伤。
Left injuries on the face, neck, arms, and legs.
当柯桂妈试图用身体保护儿子时，又被抓住头发暴打。
When Kegwei's mother was attempting to protect her son with her body, she was grabbed by the hair and savagely bitten.
在这种再不反抗就会被打死的情况下，同时也为了保护发高烧40度的孩子，柯桂顺手拿起了菜刀，试图自卫。
In a fear of his life and in order to protect his son stricken with a fever whose body temperature reached 104 degrees, Kegwei grabbed a knife in self-defense.
张健见状大喊：“他手里有刀，砸死他！”
At sight of the knife, Zhang Jian yelled, "He has a knife in his hand, kill him."
万般无奈，柯桂被迫挥刀自卫。黑暗和混乱中，伤了张健和2名联防队员。
In desperation, Kegwei slashed at the attackers with the knife and injured Zhang Jian and 2 of his men in the chaos, darkness.
事发后，柯桂打110报警，警方始终没有出警。
Afterwards, Kegwei dialed 110 for police, but police did not take any action.
为防止被打死，柯桂离家出外躲避。
In fear of his life, Kegwei left home and went into hiding.
29号，在郯城县红花埠派出所投案自首。
On April 29th, Kegwei turned himself in at the Honghuafu Police Department in Yancheng City.
27号，柯桂妈被抓捕审讯，受尽辱骂和酷刑，后被带并投进监狱。
On the same day, Kegwei's mother was arrested, interrogated, and tortured before she was thrown into jail.
在狱中，每天带并工作10几个小时，从事出口创外汇的绣花劳动，因完不成定额，便被法院里站岗。
In prison, she was forced to work a dozen hours every day in spite of her illness, laboring over needlepoint work which were to be exported for foreign exchange. Because she couldn't fill the daily quota, she was penalized by standing in front of everybody. Sometimes she had to stand for 6 hours straight during one night.
有时一夜要站2班岗6个小时。
Sometimes she had to stand for 6 hours straight during one night.
后于5月5号深夜，取保候审回家。
On May 5th, she was released on bail.
去医院检查，除胆结石发炎外，胳膊被打造成血液钙化，形成创伤性肩周炎，治疗花费4800多元。
She went to hospital for physical examination. The examination results showed, in addition to infection of a kidney stone, she also has periarthritis due to beating, and the medical cost was up to 4,800 Chinese yuan.
27号，刘芳收到柯桂的短信，给我请律师。
On the 27th, Kegwei's wife Liu Fang received a short message from Kegwei, "Please hire a lawyer for me."
随后辗转去北京，聘请了丁锡奎、司伟江2位律师。他们5次去疑难， 但始终不能介入此案，理由是当局给安排了法律援助律师。
Afterward, two attorneys, Ding Xikui and Si Weijiang from Beijing, were returned, but they were never allowed to access the case, even though they have been to Yunnan 5 times. The reason was given by the authority was they have already made arrangement by hiring legal aid lawyers.
2012年11月30号，法院开庭，没有通知任何亲属和我们请的律师。
On November 30th, 2012, the court, the case of Chen Kegui was put on trial, but Kegui's family was not notified of the court trial.
法庭上的证人证言都是参与打砸抢的施暴者。
The witnesses on trial were all perpetrators who were involved in beating, looting, and robbing at my house.
可贵妈的证言则是在叫你签你就得签，不签就叫你死在这里，反正你没有人权了的威逼下形成。
The testimony of Chen Kegui's mother was given under the threat that you have to sign whenever we ask you to sign. If you don't sign, you will die here. You don't have any human rights in here.
可贵被违法判刑3年零3个月，从程序到实体显然违法。
Kegui was sentenced to 3 years and 3 months in prison, which obviously in violation of substantive and procedural law. Currently, he is serving time in a prison located in Ningyi, Shandong province, the same place where Chen Guangcheng served his time before.
2013年3月初，我在送孙子秦富斌上学途中，多次被身穿军大衣、头戴头盔、骑摩托车的人跟踪。有一天下午放学，更有双后计生办的徐熙才到学校去找我的孙子。
Since early March 2013, on my way to sending my grandson to his school, I had been followed many times by men on motorcycles in military jacket and helmets. One afternoon, after school hour, Xu Xicai from the family planning office went to the school asking to send for my grandson.
他们居然连一个5岁的孩子都不放过。
They even did not want to leave a small child alone.
2013年4月18号开始，他们每天夜里1点左右都要往我家扔石头、砖头和未开启的啤酒瓶，砸坏房瓦、门窗玻璃。
Beginning from April 18, 2013, they would throw rocks, bricks, and beer bottles at my house around 1 o'clock a.m. every night, damaging the tiles, doors, and windows.
还有死鸡、死鸭。
They also threw dead chickens and ducks.
因为当时正值禽流感高发期。
Because the bird flu was at its peak at the time.
大门口被放烧纸，村里村外张贴和散发大量小字报，侮辱和谩骂陈光诚、陈光福是大汉奸、大流氓、卖国贼。
They also posted and passed along a large amount of pamphlets, hurling abuse and insults at Chen Guangcheng, calling Chen Guangfu a traitor and a troublemaker.
扬言要砸断狗腿，砸死全家。
They also threatened to break our legs and stone the whole family to death.
且连地里栽的杨树也数次被拔，蔬菜、大蒜也被拔出晒干。
The poplar tree we planted was pulled out several times, and they did the same to vegetable and garlics, leaving them withered.
种种流氓行为，目的只是为了阻止光诚去台湾。
All this persecution was aimed to stop Chen Guangcheng from going to Taiwan.
在被骚扰期间，我10几天连续报警无果，有的时候他们干脆不接我的报警电话，但是换个电话号打就打通了，但是警方一直不出警。
During this period of time of harassment, I called for police, a dozen times but came to nothing. Sometimes they just refuse to answer my phone call. Whenever I change another phone, and immediately the phone call went through. But the police never taken any action.
5月9号，更有驾驶无牌车的不明身份人员对我进行人身攻击。
On May 9th, an unidentified person who was driving a car without a plate assaulted me
且踏坏我所骑的电动车。
and damaged my motorbike.
回家后想把遭受袭击的事情在网上、在微博上发布，结果发现被停网消号。
After I returned home, I tried to post the assault incident online, only to find that my account had been closed.
如果说扔司机死鸭是小流氓干的，那封网消号肯定是大流氓干的。
If throwing dead chickens and dead ducks are some petty crooks doing, and I believe there must have been a big crooks behind the account cancellation.
4月24号，柯贵被确诊为阑尾炎，但监狱方多次拒绝家人提出的保外就医和转到监狱以外的医院治疗的申请，致使延误治疗，造成阑尾化脓，形成脓肿。
On April 24th, Chen Kegui was positively diagnosed with appendicitis, but the prison administration repeatedly denied the family's applications for release on parole for medical treatment. The delay in treatment resulted in suppurative appendicitis, from which he still hasn't recovered.
至今没有完全康复，明天还要带病从事10几个小时的体力劳动。
While at the same time, he is ordered to work over 10 hours manual labor.
2012年5月，中央政府承诺彻查违法官员对光晨和家人的非法迫害，但此承诺至今没有兑现。
In May 2012, the central government promised that the prosecution of Chen Guangcheng and his family by local officials would be thoroughly investigated. However, this promise has not been fulfilled at this point.
希望美国国会及奥巴马政府本着人权至上的原则，给予在中国受到政治压制的公民予以基本的道义支持。
Finally, I sincerely hope that in accordance with human rights principles, the U.S. Congress and the Obama administration extend their fundamental support to those Chinese citizens who suffer from the political persecution.
谢谢大家。
Thank you.
Wong Fu, thank you very much for your testimony. And I do have some questions, but I will wait. Now I would invite Dr. Marcus, if you could present your testimony now.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this event, which I have found inexpressibly moving. My own experiences were moving enough, but this has gone beyond anything that I had experienced before. First of all, I think that Chairman articulated what I have learned extremely well, and I have nothing to add to that. It was an incredible summary of the condensation of my own experiences in China. Secondly, I think that the daughters of the men who are imprisoned are a credit to the United States. It's China's loss. These young women are just astonishing and actually are exemplars of what we would hope all of our children would epitomize. Their dignity, honor, passion, commitment to the values that make the United States unique are beyond anything I ever anticipated. And I am so proud that we have been able to find, that we offer them the ability to explore life fully, even though it has an inordinate amount of pain associated with it. At least they have the freedom to express their points of view. I might then segue just a bit to why I got interested in this, because there is a sixth daughter whom I will speak for without her authority, but I think she would give it to me, and that is Julie, who is the daughter of Zhu Yufu. This is the man whom I went to visit, and I went because we have something that Bob Fu calls fondly, I think, the Horowitz Hilton. When Chinese come to Washington for one reason or another, we house a number of them, and it's enriched our lives enormously. Among the people who came to stay with us were, in fact, two sisters and a brother of Zhu Yufu. They, two of them now have sought political asylum and obtained it, along with their spouses and one child, I believe, each. I think that both of them have left a child behind in China. There was a third sister who has a son by a Japanese man, and she's gone back to live in Japan now. We bonded with one another over knitting. It was quite remarkable. We sat at the kitchen table. Neither of us spoke each other's languages, but we spoke the language of knitting. And they're inordinately talented. I had huge admiration for them. In addition, I do brush painting, and the brother, Xiao Fu, is a brush painter. So we made friends over art, if you will, without language at all. That got me interested in Zhu Yufu. It also taught me the lesson of the price that's paid by families, including extended families, for the nobility of thought of someone that they love. I happened to see a submission by a lawyer on behalf of Zhu Yufu to the UN, indicating that he had cardiac problems of a rather potentially severe nature that might cause him either to die suddenly or, in fact, to develop an illness that, if it were not properly treated, would cause him to die. And I opined that if it were possible for me to do anything to make life easier for him, which is to say to get him adequate medical attention, I would like to do it. And as it happened, it was thought by people who are very active in human rights in China that it might be useful for me to go. So I went. I went with Cody Ness, who had spent time in China and speaks Mandarin. And we went on a date that we knew would be a day when Zhu Yufu's wife would be visiting him in prison. We met her in the prison. We were admitted to the prison. We then had to negotiate with a guard in the prison who, when I said that he wanted to know why I was there, I said I was there because I had read that Zhu Yufu had potential serious cardiac problems, and I wanted to be assured that he was getting adequate medical attention. I had been told that he was seen once a month, that he had his blood pressure checked, he was given an antihypertensive, and he was given an herbal medicine for heart failure, but nothing more than that, and that his treatment was very perfunctory at best. There also was some concern that he was despairing, given the fact that he had spent a third, at least, of his adult life in prison. The man, when I reviewed with him what the UN report said, well, we don't believe in the UN. Then I said, well, what if he dies in prison? His response was, there is no if. After a little more skirmishing, it became clear to me that we were not going to be allowed to get in. Finally, I said to him, would you tell him that I've come? Because I knew that it would be important to his morale if he knew that a Westerner had come to visit him. And the man said no and ushered us out. By that time, he was pretty angry, but in control. But he subsequently detained us, and confiscated Cody's cell phone and held the phone for a couple of hours, and I'm sure scrubbed it. So we have no idea what happened to the phone. We clearly could not leave the prison at that point because there were two guards here, we were here, the door was there, and there was no way we were going to get out. We got interviewed. Interview was relatively benign. Finally, after about 2 hours, the cell phone was returned, and we were allowed to leave. As a result of our efforts to get in, the Chinese internet carried this fairly widely, and the attention of a rather eminent human rights lawyer was attracted. He came from Nanjing the following day, agreed to take the case, and started the legal proceedings to do so. He has, to date, not been permitted to see Zhu Yufu, and in fact, we understand relatively recently has been threatened with withdrawal of his license if he continues to pursue the case. In addition, and we've heard about reprisal, Zhu Yufu has been moved from his prison block to the psychiatric block, which is not viewed as good news. It is, in a way, an effort to gaslight him and also to neutralize him so that he will be sufficiently demeaned that he will give up his desire, perhaps, to live, although that isn't at all clear. What became clear to me with my relationships with his wife, Zhu Yufu's wife, and his daughter, is that they are more or less in despair, as opposed to the young women who are here. If Zhu Li were here, she would be shocked that anybody would be advocating for her and for her family in this body, because her expectation is always to be told no and to back off. When she was doing my interpreting when we were in the office of the prison, every time the guard said no, she backed off, and I had to almost pull her forward, because no is viewed as no, not as an invitation to the dance or an invitation to negotiating, but no. So it is the repression of her ability to think is what was very striking to me. Also, the fact that her mother is emotionally, I think, really running out of resilience. So I learned about the long-term, profound and extensive, as you've learned here again, repression, in a way, indirect torture of family members of people who have a very profound sense of morality. The Chinese do indeed have laws on their books that would allow for the release of Zhu Yufu. He fulfills all the requirements. However, they are not allowing him to make application for early release, despite that. So the fact is that although the laws are on the books, they are under the control of political authorities, and judges do not exercise any authority other than that which I believe is essentially given to them by the state. So it is unclear at this point what will happen to him in terms of his ability to make use of those laws, which, if he were able to do so, would allow for him to have an early release. I thank you very much. I am deeply appreciative of being in the company of the people in whose company I am today. Thank you.
Dr. Marcus, thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your advocacy, your willingness to put yourself out, to bring your medical degree and background, 40 years as a medical doctor, to at least try to examine Mr. Zhu, which would have been, I think, an extremely important contribution to his health. The fact that you've adopted, more or less, this brave man as a prisoner of conscience, more people ought to do just that. Find one or two individuals, adopt them, and advocate for them the way you are doing and doing again today. So I certainly thank you for that. It makes a huge difference. And to the Horowitz Hilton, I know you leave the light on. That's a different hotel chain, of course, but and that generosity it just goes so far in letting people know that the hospitality and the warmth that you and your husband Michael show to dissidents and people who have braved so much, suffered so much, and yet they find a place of refuge in your home. That is truly remarkable. Thank you. I would like to ask, Mr. Chen, if I could just say briefly, your brother Chen Guanzhang, has relentlessly, and I mean relentlessly, in every speech, every venue that I have seen him at, here, right where you sit, when he testified last spring, has pressed doggedly for the release of your son, and has asked the State Department over and over and over and over again to advocate for his release and to hold your entire family harmless. That has been his number one priority, and the fact that you are here today at his request, I think, further underscores that his concern for your family back in China never is unceasing. And he does say this to the State Department. What are you doing in country? Has the ambassador tried to, our U.S. ambassador, tried to see Chen Qikui? What are they doing to advocate for his release? You mentioned in your testimony, and it was very telling, how, if I could find it again, how you spent 72 hours being beaten and tortured, and that they also were beating family members until they got tired. They literally, they couldn't punch any longer because they were tired. That just underscores the brutality and a cruelty that I think most Americans don't appreciate. And this goes on day in and day out, directed against the best and the bravest and the brightest of the People's Republic of China. So I just want you to know that we will continue to bring your case, that of your son, the entire family, following Chen Guanzhang's tremendous leadership on that, to try to get our government to do far more than we've done. Guanzhang had asked a series of specific questions of the State Department and got back a totally inadequate answer. He laid it out here. He laid it out elsewhere too, but from where you sit when he testified, and got back a nothing-burger answer, which I found appalling in terms of his own situation, the investigation that you referenced in your testimony as well. So thank you, and I would like to yield to my good friend and colleague, Mr. Meadows, for any comments or questions that he might have.
Thank each of you for your testimony and for being willing to serve and answer a call to truly make a difference. So I just want to say thank each one of you. I guess my question becomes, as I mentioned earlier, we've had a number of hearings where this is a reoccurring theme, where we have human rights abuses that continue to happen in China. And my concern, specifically, Mr. Chen, with you being here today, is the repercussions that family members may face in China as a result of you being here. Do you think highlighting this issue is something that we need to continue to do? And is it starting to make a difference?
我认为，这个对中国政府一些不人道的做法，我们就是要持续的揭露。有一个在中国流行一句话说，这个人在做，天在看，这很有道理。
I believe that. Sorry about that. I believe that we still should continue to expose those inhumane acts by the Chinese government. There is an old saying in China, which is the heavens are watching over what we are doing here on earth.
我今天过来的目的不单是为这个我的儿子陈克贵呼吁，在国内还有很多 类似于秦克贵这样的正当防卫者被冠以各种罪名抓捕判刑。
The reason why I came here today is not just to appeal for my son, because there are hundreds of thousands of Chinese citizens who suffer from injustice and persecution under all kinds of excuses made by the Chinese authorities.
还有的甚至被剥夺了生命。
Even worse, some of them have been deprived life.
我想，针对类似的问题，这个外界的关注是会起到很大的作用的。
So I believe that the attention given by the outside world will going to make great difference in such situations.
作为我个人和我的家庭受到他们的一些打击、迫害，甚至一些威胁，应该说是与整个这个人权进步，相比来讲，个人的事情还是小事。就是说，个人的事小事，关注推动中国的人权。
He said, I believe the sufferings our family has endured this far is not that important compared to the larger goal of promoting the human rights movement in mainland China.
Thank you. And Dr. Marcus, when you went to visit, I mean, obviously you were thwarted at a number of different fronts in terms of continued access. Would you say that this would be indicative of a lower level person trying to implement directions from a higher authority, or is it someone at a lower level just implementing their own sense of justice or lack thereof? I guess what I'm getting at is do you think it's systemic throughout most of top officials in the Chinese government?
Answer. I think that it was interesting to me that we got waved in, so somebody knew that we were coming. I have no idea. So I think that probably both things were occurring. I think that he had probably gotten instructions, and I think he was more than happy to comply with those instructions. I think he wanted to get us out of there as fast as he could. And I was fairly persistent, so it didn't work, and it made him angry.
Thank you. Pastor Fu, good to see you again. Thank you for being a faithful voice for those that do not have a voice.
Thank you.
One of the things that I just heard is that this is a plight that many, I guess it was hundreds of thousands of other Chinese people are experiencing. Would you concur with that? I mean, it's very easy to take just a few people and say, well, this is only happening in a few isolated situations. It's very different if it is indeed hundreds of thousands of people, and I saw a few people nodding in the background that it was hundreds. So would you characterize that as being accurate?
Absolutely. It's this 18 is really the tip of the iceberg, the representative of hundreds of thousands. I mean, just in this year alone, I mean, we have seen several hundred. This just perhaps even thousands. We don't know their names, but we know some of their names. In my written testimony, I listed more than 130. Just were detained, arrested. Some already been tried and sentenced for simply making a poster and asking the government officials to be transparent of their own property, and posted that picture online. and were arrested. And that's this year, in the past few months. And already more than 120 some Tibetans, committed self-immolation and were killed. Because of the desperation. And already there are many others many others of the faith community, the Christian pastors, the Catholic bishops, the Uyghurs and the Falun Gong practitioners. This year already really reached the worst, as I mentioned, since the massacre of Tiananmen Square in 1989. So this is absolutely not just a local or just some short period of time persecution. Is systematic, is central government orchestrated, and is still going on right now.
There is a danger from time to time when you address human rights violations of the nature perhaps that we're talking about today. Some of them may be more horrific than that, some perhaps less. But there is the danger when we do that the people of that particular country may see it as anger or animosity towards a people that are far away. And yet, would you say that the majority of the people that you know, that you've heard from, I heard it earlier with some of the young ladies that testified, that there is truly a love for their country of China, that this is not a we hate China mentality. There is a love for their country, and what they want is justice within their own country, not to put away their native homelands to go somewhere else. Would you say that is across the board the predominant feeling?
Absolutely, that's a predominant feeling, and the way that these hundreds of thousands for prisoner of conscience handled their advocacy, their campaign for freedom, for transparency, demonstrate itself that they are the true patriots. I mean, they love the motherland of China. They're not just they're not anti-China or anti-Chinese people at all. They actually just the opposite. They want to hold those abusers, the corrupted officials, accountable, which should be echoed, proved by the Chinese central government leaders. And yet they were jailed for loving their country. And I think really, those are not only heroes for freedom for China, but also they are campaigning, in essence, for the defining of the 21st century. Really, if China is free in the 21st century and become a democratic country, it essentially remove a threat, not only in a regional threat, as Chinese communists has demonstrated to Taiwan, to Japan, to many neighbors of China, but also to the world. I think they are doing something more than for their own country, but also for the world.
I'll finish up with this one question, and I'll throw it out to any of you that would care to comment, because it may be something that you can't speak to. And I guess it's more advice for me and some of my colleagues. How can we communicate most effectively a desire to address the human rights issues, but at the same time address a love for the Chinese people and a respect for Chinese sovereignty at the same time, because sometimes they get crossed. Dr. Marcus, any idea how to do that?
It's a toughie.
It's a toughie, okay. Well, if you have any thoughts, we'll leave it with that. If you have any thoughts on how we can best do that, if you will just provide some written guidelines, I can tell you that perhaps those that are covering this here today will hear the heart of a father and a congressman who wants to deal with some of the issues that we've heard, and yet at the same time has a mutual respect and admiration for the Chinese people. I believe in sovereignty. It is one of those things that is foundational to our American way of democracy that may be foreign to many others. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
Thank you very much. I said I'm a good friend and colleague. Let me just ask a few final questions and then anything you'd like to add before we close. Dr. Marcus, and again, I appreciate your advocacy on behalf of Mr. Zhu. What's the status of his family? And are they, we've heard from Mr. Chen's family, the 5 daughters, obviously. You might want to speak about how his family and perhaps friends that you may have met are faring under this tremendous pressure. Secondly, Pastor Fu, you pointed out that the appeasement policy of harmony diplomacy adopted by some Western societies toward totalitarianism is enabling the dictatorship to do what it wants because they know that we are very weak and seemingly unconcerned. We'll say some of the right words, but what's behind it? If you could speak to that, and also whether or not religious freedom is improving, or is it the same as it was perhaps a year ago or 2, which was awful, or is it getting worse? And I would also ask Mr. Chen, you pointed out that, and I think this bears repeating in your testimony, without Chen Guangchen's escape, Chen Qiui's case wouldn't exist. The continued imprisonment of Chen Qiui is punishment for Chen Guangchen's escape. You also point out that in 2012, the central government promised that the persecution of Chen Guangchen and his family, you and your loved ones, by local officials would be investigated thoroughly, and fundamental civil rights of Chen Guangchen's family will be protected. However, this promise has not been fulfilled at this point. Even worse, the government has continued to attack, retaliate, and persecute Chen Guangchen's family in his hometown in the form of imprisonment, surveillance, slandering, insulting, harassment, and beatings. Has Ambassador Locke, Gary Locke, our U.S. ambassador to China, met with you, talked to you, visited you and your family? Has he raised the issue face-to-face with his interlocutors, with the foreign ministry leaders and others in China? Dr. Marcus, perhaps you could begin.
Yes. As far as Zhu Yufu's family is concerned, there are a total of 6 in the family. It's a very large Chinese family. 2 of his siblings are lying low. They're staying away from the government's eye. There's a brother and a sister. One sister has gone to Japan. She has a son there. 2 have sought political asylum in the United States and have gotten it. His wife is working has a menial job. She was a pharmacist, but she is no longer working in that capacity. And I don't know if she lost the job or not, but she's now working for somebody, doing something fairly menial, even though she's trained as a pharmacist. His daughter has a degree in art history and a credential to teach art, cannot get a job because she's the daughter of a criminal. So she's gone back to school, and she's now training in museumology. Their son has a degree in physics. He was imprisoned for a year because he barred the door to the police when they came after his father during one of the times his father was arrested. And so he was imprisoned for a year. So he's now a criminal. So he can work, but not as a physicist. I would like to respond. I was a little flipped to Mr. Meadows. It does occur to me that what I've heard when I've asked people about what seems to make a difference in China, why it's different, is always the same answer: the Internet. And what I've also heard is that what the Chinese lack, the people lack, is the truth, because it's always spun, it's often spun by the government. The one thing that is very difficult to spin is direct social media. And I had the opportunity of discussing this with a young woman who got an MBA at Stanford that I met in the Shanghai airport. She said the major difference she's seen is because of the Internet. So I think the Internet is crucial. I think, if you'll forgive me, I don't want to offer an opinion other than that. This is what I've heard. So I would say to you that if there is one focus that keeps one away from the issues that you're talking about, it would be the Internet. And may I, a business matter, offer my written testimony to the record?
Without objection, your full testimony and that of all of our witnesses today will be made a part of the record.
Okay, and the only other thing I want to say is that we assume that the reason that Zhu Fu has been changed to the psychiatry block is that it's in retaliation for the attention he's gotten. We don't know that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I answer your question, I want to say a few words to answer Congressman Meadows' previous question about the sovereignty and raising human rights. Every time when the State Department of the U.S. issued an annual human rights report, or issued the religious persecution, global religious freedom report, the Chinese government always issued a sort of angry denouncing statement by saying the standard is always said this is the interference of the internal affairs. And the human rights and this fundamental freedom is not the internal affairs. And to abuse a fellow human being and the dignity and deprive of their basic freedoms is not the internal affairs. And the fact that the Chinese government now start issuing human rights report about the U.S. itself demonstrated that if it's internal affairs, it's a fair game. So they are interfering in the U.S. internal affairs, to say the least. I think China is a signature country for various the international human rights covenants, and the Chinese own constitution. For instance, in Article 36 also says the citizens' basic freedom of religious belief should be guaranteed. And China also signed or agreed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I think the fellow members of Congress, when you express the disapproval of the human rights abuses in China, is not interference of the internal affairs, but actually you want to help China to improve its international standing. So then I think it answered the first question about the appeasement charge. I mean the appeasement diplomacy. I think the danger actually is when the brutal dictators start treating this as internal affairs by arbitrarily putting the citizens into detention center, imprisonment without any due process. When our Western democracy countries treat that as internal affairs. And when our own Secretary of State make that as, human rights should not interfere with the other so-called priority items, the security, the economic items, I think that sent a very wrong
on that
signal.
point, that was when Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, en route to Beijing, said that she would not allow human rights to interfere with global climate change and selling U.S. debt. Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah, that's what I refer to. And I think that our leaders of the democratic countries, when we made that kind of remarks, it's not only, hurtful to those human rights campaigners, like those fathers of the 5 daughters, but also it really emboldened the dictators and the persecutors, and they take that as a green light to continue and increasing the persecution. And it sent a wrong signal to the persecutors that the democratic countries will not care as long as the trade continues, as long as the economic relationship is strengthened. And in terms of the religious freedom issues, certainly it has been worsening. And I remembered it takes really more than a year for the current administration to even nominate and appoint the ambassador at large for the International Religious Freedom Office in the State Department. And unfortunately, after the current ambassador at large, Ambassador Susan Cook, resigned, and the office, the position is still not filled up until today. So I think President Clinton would not do that, and President Jimmy Carter would not do that. Certainly, President Bush, the 2 Bushes, will not do that. I think this is very unfortunate. This is certainly, sending a wrong signal at this critical time when the Chinese human rights and religious freedom reached its worst in 20-some years.
Mr. Smith, regarding the question you just raised before,
yes,
whether Ambassador Gary Locke visited his family and raised the issue to local authorities,
yes,
he said the answer is no. If whether he has, okay, I'm sorry. 重复你刚才说的。你重复，他说你的那个美国大使有没有去你们家探访过？
没有。
He said no.
对。
那他有没有跟那个当地的官员提起？
他提没提这个，我不知道这个事情。
He said regarding whether he has raised the issue of the persecution of our family to local authorities, I am not aware of that.
Well, we will reiterate our request that he do so. We'll write him today and write the Secretary of State, John Kerry, as well, asking and convey to them, include with that, not only your testimony, but all the testimonies, because that was, in my opinion, based on what occurred during the Chen Quanzhen process, when he was in country still, and then when he came here, those promises have gone unfulfilled. And so we will follow up on that, I can assure you. Pastor Fu?
Yeah, I have related to that. I have one final comment. Actually, I still remembered in last August, Mr. Chairman, yourself and Congressman Wolf and several other committee chairmen, as well as the Speaker Banner and Minority Leader and Leader Pelosi, you issued a joint letter to the Chinese President Hu Jintao, then President Hu Jintao, and the Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao, to ask them to follow through, what they promised to Mr. Chen Guangcheng. And you actually also write a letter along with Speaker Banner and Leader Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi, to President Obama and Secretary John Kerry this year, right, to ask them to meet with Mr. Chen Guangcheng and other the human rights, the family members of those human rights campaigners in China, such as Gao Zhisheng. And I don't know. I mean, as far as I know, there's no positive response. And I think the leader of Human Rights Now, Attorney Jared Gensler, made a direct appeal to both the White House and through a Washington Post opinion just last month to make that point that the quiet, so-called under-the-table diplomacy has failed and failed miserably. And so it's time for the leader of our country, the president himself, to speak up, to show that he's personally engaging by meeting and listening and hearing directly from these daughters and the family members.
Thank you. Is there anything else any of you would like to say before we conclude? Again, I want to thank you for your testimony, for your leadership. It is extraordinary, and since the 5 daughters are still here, thank them again profusely for the love and devotion they have shown towards their fathers, their families, and for being willing to come here and share that with us on this committee. The hearing is adjourned.
So you're a doctor? Medical doctor?